Welcome to week 5 of your watercolor class. I am going to give you guys a really short explanation of what is happening this week. I didn't receive too many questions about last week's assignments, which is pretty cool because that means that we're all on the same page, we're all getting stuff in, and we're meeting deadlines and so on. And it's kind of interesting because I started another class out in Porterville and they are having all sorts of troubles. They're having all sorts of trouble just trying to upload pictures and all of that. But you guys are totally beyond that. So good job. And let's see, let's go ahead and jump right into it. Week 5. Let's see. So we're going, or actually before I talk about the short projects you guys are gonna be doing, I'm gonna talk a little bit about this artist here, Albrecht Dürer. He is one of my favorite artists who happens to be one of the master watercolor artists. So I wanted to share this with you here. So a little bit of information about Dürer. He was around during this time, 1471 through 1528. He is an artist from the Northern Renaissance. He is German. So the Renaissance you probably have heard of. In other words, you can remember Italy during the 1400s. So a lot of the master artists came from that Renaissance period. Artists such as Da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael, and who else? What other Ninja Turtle characters do we know? I'm just kidding. And so Dürer is from the Northern Renaissance. So think Northern Europe, countries such as the Netherlands, Holland, Germany, and a few other ones. So Dürer was a printmaker and he is also a painter. He did a lot of illustrations that help people do studies. So if you can slightly recall some information about the Renaissance, this was a time when many European countries were in a way shifting from a very strict Christian-based upbringing, and that they were starting to open up a little bit in terms of subject matter. They were painting what was called genre paintings. They weren't just painting about the divine. They were trying to mix in a little bit of everyday subject matter. This was especially the case in the Northern Renaissance. During the Italian Renaissance, many paintings were still based off Christianity. There is some paintings that were combination of Christian and also some pagan works as well. Yet during the Northern Renaissance, during this time, they were more about painting everyday subject matter. So it was a different direction in terms of what they were interested in. And so let me just go ahead and jump right into the first example of work by this artist, Pond in the Wood, 1496. And I specifically picked out these works of art because they are watercolor. Okay, so we have a very traditional type of landscape work of art here. Hopefully you guys can get some inspiration. But we're going to work on a subject such as this quite soon, not this week, but really soon. And now that you have dabbled with the medium, you can look at the master's work here and see how he treats the media. And so I wonder if you guys can see my mouth. Can you guys see my mouth? Maybe not. So let's look at some of the characteristics of his work. If you were to look at the lower right-hand corner, and if you can see some of the foreground there, very loose in comparison to what we might see if we move our attention towards the lower center where we are looking at grass. And you can probably say that Durer used different media. He didn't just use watercolor by itself. He actually uses oil pastel and probably some ink as well. That's how he's able to get some of these very strong contrasts, and it's quite difficult to do with just watercolor alone. And you guys will eventually be able to do something like that, but not at the moment, as we are still experimenting with technique. And so there's a little bit of looseness in the clouds, especially in the center, and especially in the top center. Okay, so it almost looks like an oil painting. If I were to just look at the amount of negative space that is relatively clear, that's when I'm going to tell myself maybe that's watercolor, because of the lack of pigment. When it comes to watercolor, we almost expect for the surface to be seen. We want to see that paper shine through. But when it comes to the things that you are working on in class, I want you guys to focus on things like composition. You want to use the whole space. You don't want to leave too much of the paper blank, okay? So it's always good to have a little bit of tone opposed to no tone at all. And let me go ahead and move on to the next work of art here, House in the Pond, 1496, by the same artist. And you can see a little bit more recognizable watercolor characteristics here, especially in the upper right-hand corner. And you can, for those who are somewhat experienced in watercolor, you might recognize some of the dry brush technique being used here. And for the other students who are relatively new with this medium, it's a technique where you're using very low amount of water, and then you can make your marks very, they look very rough, opposed to having the pigment dipped in water and having it flow. Instead, there's less flow. It doesn't have that characteristics that we're normally used to when it comes to this medium. And if you look at the treatment of the water, there is some really interesting things happening there. I mean, I feel like I can't tell just from a photograph, but I'm going to guess that he used some scraping, or he might be actually using a very light pen, maybe like a white ink, to create some of the highlights here. And if you look at the lower right-hand corner again, the artist makes that area relatively loose. And I think it's really cool how artists, they do that. They want for us to see what they want us to see what the medium is. Like, I can do all of these realistic things, but I want you to know that this is also something made from my hand, and that it's you know, photography wasn't really available back then, but he wanted to, in a way, put his own sense of expression that artists weren't really doing at the time. And if you look at what is happening in the negative space in the upper left corner, and I'm looking back and forth because I'm looking at what you guys are looking at. The upper left corner, there are some really bold lines of pigment, especially with the yellows. And so that is another work by the same artist, Albrecht Dürer. And here is one more example. And this is what he made a lot of when it came to this medium here, these illustrations of animals and plants. And this one's one of my favorites by the artist. And it's very, of course, representational. If you look at what's happening in the shadow of the object, of the animal, some looseness there created by the watercolor media. And there is really so many neat things happening with the texture, and you can probably guess he used a different medium for those things as well. And so hopefully the class will be able to create some works based off of nature, and that we have fun making some of these types of works. And so that's enough of Dur. I just wanted to show you guys some work by an artist that I really enjoy, especially that he uses the medium that we are studying right now. And so for this week, we're going to talk about 3 different types of washes. Last week, we talked about different types of mixing. This time, we're going to talk about washes. And so a wash is basically covering a whole area with just one color or one or more colors. So it's very similar. It will connect to what you guys did last week with the mixing. And so here is an example of the flat wash here, and just some things that you guys can use to make this a little bit easier. Watercolor paper, you can use a whole sheet, or you can just use half of your paper. I just used a whole sheet of paper for mine because my watercolor paper pad isn't that large, so it's actually pretty good for doing studies. And so I was able to create this relatively even flow of color. And that's the goal of creating a wash. Sometimes there are hints of inconsistencies, especially in the lower section of what I did. There's a little bit of streakiness. And if it's subtle, it's not too bad. So try your best to make it even. You'll get more detailed instructions on the actual assignment. So I actually have a little bit of an explanation of how to create this on there. And so when it comes to the flat wash, it's something that all artists should learn. Watercolor, oil, acrylic, you will always use this. It's one of the basic techniques when it comes to painting in general. Okay, so the second type of wash you guys are going to learn is called a gradated wash. And so this is very similar to the first wash in terms of the materials that you're going to end up using. Again, more detailed instructions on that, on each assignment. I didn't want to give you all the instructions in one, in one demo or one file, and said it'll be on separate files. And so when it comes to this gradated wash, I'm going from more dark to light. And you can see that on my example, I was having a little bit of trouble with the sizing because I was trying to stretch this paper, and I was using a different method that I'm used to. I'm using this paper that's relatively inexpensive, and it's not that good quality, but you can still see the gradation, which is fine. But if you look at these little particles of paper, that's the sizing that's coming off because I put too much water. So just something to keep in mind. All of these things that we end up doing in watercolors, it's almost all experimentation. So I know what to do, what not to do next time. I'm not gonna make my water too wet, otherwise it's gonna take off some of that sizing. But in the end, I was still able to make a gradated wash, so I'm happy. And so the third type of wash is called a variegated wash, in that you're going to end up doing 2 variations. One is with 2 colors, the other one is with 3. So the goal here is to go from one color to another and to try to make it blend as much as possible. Okay, again, more instructions, more detailed instructions on the actual assignment, because these are 3 assignments, but 3 separate ones. And I'm hoping that these different types of washes are going to help out on the upcoming project that you guys are going to have. So you guys probably finished doing or maybe you're working on the cool palette of the still life. And I'm hoping that you guys use this as an opportunity to experiment a little with it. You don't have to do the same exact thing that you did with the warm palette. Push it a little, try to have fun with it. And so I think that is it for this really short, learning objective video. Let me know if you guys have any questions.